Good evening. This is Joel Moses with the Photographic Historical Society of New England. I have the honor of being the president, and I welcome all of you for this evening's presentation. For those of you who are already members, welcome back. And for those of you who are considering membership, please do so. We are an active group and we have a lot to offer. I will turn this over to Dana G, who will introduce our speaker for this evening. Hope you enjoy it.
Thanks, Joel. Hi, I'm Dana G. I'm the program coordinator for PHSNE. And tonight we're going to be hearing from Edith Cuerrier. Before I introduce Edith, I just wanted to mention the Zoom settings. Please stay muted during the presentation. And then you can type your questions into chat, which is at the bottom of your screen. You can type your questions in and then I'll relay them to Edith at the end. And at the very end, we'll have a general discussion. But please do stay muted during her presentation. Edith Cuerrier was hired by the George Eastman Museum in 2017 to be a cataloguer for the Gabriel Cromer Collection. Cromer was a Frenchman living near Paris, the early turn of the century, and collected quite a bit of early photography and photographic history. Edith cataloged for 2 years. In her presentation, she'll share some of what she learned and worked on this fascinating project. She is French-Canadian and grew up near Montreal, has been living in Newfoundland for almost 2 decades. She served in the Royal Canadian Air Force for 22 years as a military photographer before earning a Bachelor of Arts in Archaeology from the Memorial University of Newfoundland in 2006. In 2009, she completed a master's in photo preservation and collection management from Ryerson University. And she has been working as an archives technician at the Provincial Archives of Newfoundland and Labrador on and off since 2009. And in 2016, she founded the Photographic Historical Society of Newfoundland and Labrador. And we're very happy to have her with us tonight. So Edith, it's all yours.
Okay, I just remembered to unmute myself. So hello. I'm going to share my screen. Share. And from the beginning. Okay, I think we're good to go. So welcome to my presentation, Cataloging Cromer, the Gabriel Cromer Collection Project at George Eastman Museum. I was a very, very fortunate person who was hired to be the cataloger for this project. And the project was made possible by a grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. So as the cataloger hired for this project, I got to know Mr. Cromer very well, and as well as his collection. And I'm really delighted to be here this evening to share that with you. I'll share some of what I saw and learned in my 2 years on the project. And by the way, the image on my title slide here is a little 1 centimeter or ½ an inch sticker that Cromer used to identify the pieces of this collection. And we found this type of sticker all over the items that I was looking at. So it kind of represents the collection. So the reason I was hired was that I was qualified to do the cataloging, of course, but also because I'm fluent in French and I could read the old French 19th century handwriting on some of the material. I was already familiar with the museum because I went to George Eastman Museum in 2009 or 2008 to work on my master's project, which was 2 albums of Newfoundland photos that belonged to George Eastman. So George Eastman, as many of you probably already know, was an American innovator and entrepreneur who founded the Eastman Kodak Company, and he invented rolled film, thereby making photography something that anybody could do. Now the George Eastman Museum, which opened in 1949 in Rochester, is the world's oldest museum dedicated to photography and film. And it's a great place to visit. It was built, the house was built in 1905, and a lot of the rooms there are returned the way they were in George Eastman's lifetime, and they contain the legacy collection that is made up of his personal furniture and effects. And the modern gallery, archives, and library building where I worked was built on the land at the rear of the mansion. It was built in 1989, and it contains more than 400,000 photographs and negatives, 28,000 films, 53,000 publications, and more than 25,000 pieces of technology. Now, one of the most important collections among all those objects is the Cromer Collection. It was one of the 3 foundational collections of the museum, the other 2 being the Boyer and the Shipley collection. Both are larger than the Cromer collection, but neither contain as much early French material. Before I go any further, I would like to point out that all the images and objects shown in this presentation are part of this, the museum's old holdings. And first of all, let me introduce you to Monsieur Gabriel Cromer. As mentioned earlier, he was a Frenchman, born in 1873. He trained as an attorney, but he began making photographs while he was a student. And rather than practice law, he turned to photography as a profession. And he set up this beautiful studio in his home in Clamart, which is a suburb of Paris. Now, note the skylight structure and the retractable blind system, which I will come back to in a few minutes. So Cromer's specialty was portraiture and carbon prints, for which he won several awards. And these are examples of his work that are in his collection. He was interested in the history of photography, and he began collecting Photographica around 1900 through traditional means, such as auctioneers and dealers and antiquarian booksellers. And through his contacts at the Société Française de Photographie, which is the French Photography Society that still exists today, and which he joined in 1912. And he was a very active member, and he was their librarian for many years. And he was actually at a meeting of the night before he passed away. His collection grew to include a considerable number of rare and important photographs. Excuse me. I have to clear my throat here. Sorry about that. So his important and rare photographs include daguerreotypes, ambrotypes, salted paper prints, paper negatives, albumen silver prints, and early photogravures. Some of you might recognize here an uncut sheet of carte de visite by Daguerre, a salted paper negative, and in the top corner by Lesec, and the salted paper print by Legray in the bottom center. He also collected photographically illustrated books and photo albums of all types, and he accumulated countless photography manuals, catalogs, posters, pamphlets. He also acquired all manner of photography and pre-photography equipment. This includes camera obscuras, drawing machines, lenses, cameras, as well as darkroom kits and paraphernalia. He established relationships with the relatives and friends of figures such as Daguerre and Sabatier-Blot and other famous early practitioners of the art of photography. Oops. For example, we know that he had a fairly close personal relationship with Louis Lumière, from whom he acquired the cinematograph seen here in the center. Some of Cromer's other early motion devices also include praxinoscope at right, magic lanterns at bottom left, and so on. And the Lumière brothers, as some of you may know, were instrumental in the history of cinema, and they also developed the autochrome color process. So Louis Lumière and Mr. Cromer probably met because they were both members of the French Photography Society. So that's probably where they knew each other from. While most of Cromer's material is French, he also acquired some exquisite American objects, like this daguerreotype of tourists viewing Niagara Falls from Prospect Point by American photographer Platt Babbitt. And this number 3 Kodak camera, which is made in Rochester. So basically, Cromer collected anything and everything connected to the beginnings of photography, including paintings, drawings, caricatures, silhouettes, sculptures, lithographs, and print advertising such as these. If it had a camera or a photographer in it, or in this case, a magic lantern, he collected it. And I threw in this one in particular for all the catalogers among us. So he even acquired several pieces of original artwork made by Daguerre, such as this drawing. And as you probably know, Daguerre is credited as one of the inventors of photography, but he was also a talented painter and artist in his own right. So Cromer's collection lived in his house, much of it in the same room as his studio, which you saw earlier. And the skylight retractable blind system that I pointed out is visible here on the ceiling in the top left and bottom right images. So starting in the 1920s, Cromer gave presentations and he curated exhibitions dedicated to photography, and he used his own collection to illustrate the history of photography. In 1925, the SFP, the French Photography Society, they hosted an exhibition that featured a large amount of Cromer's collection. And I was able to use the catalog listing that was published at the time to confirm some of the items in the museum holdings, such as the camera that you see here, the famous Giroux camera, was in that exhibition. This camera, as well as the framed objects on the wall above it, are all here in, not here, but in Rochester in the museum holdings. as well as many of the items on the shelves, which are a lot of various size lenses and cameras. In fact, the curator in charge of the project is hoping to recreate this wall in the future exhibition of Cromer's collection. And this exhibition is right now planned to take place in July to December 2022, so next year. But back to Cromer's story. Oops, I went one slide too far, sorry. All right, so in November of 1931, Gabriel Cromer wrote a formal letter to the French government suggesting that they establish a national museum dedicated to photography, and he was hoping to sell them his collection, and he offered himself as the first curator. Sadly, Cromer died suddenly in 1934 at age 60, and his dream was never realized. So in 1939, his widow, Madame Cromer, put the collection up for sale, but she couldn't find a buyer in France at that time. That's when the collection came to the attention of Walter Clark of the Eastman Kodak Company in Rochester, and he successfully lobbied his Kodak colleagues to purchase it. So in November 1939, the Cromer collection shipped from Paris to Rochester just as World War II was starting. So when I began working on the project, I searched for a listing or inventory of the collection. And in this letter that you see here about the shipment to Walter Clark in November 1939, Mr. Bonner of Kodak Pathé, which is the branch of Kodak in France, in Paris, he wrote, "As I told you in my letter of September, there is no complete inventory. I enclose copies of a partial description of the collection, which Madame Cromer handed me, also the few index cards which Mr. Cromer was working on at the time of his death. These will be of some use in identifying the various objects." So you might as well have been talking to me when I wrote this, because that's what I was looking for. And so I did find some of that material, and I used it to track things down. So 10 years after the collection had made it to Rochester, in 1949, the Kodak Company loaned the collection to the newly opened George Eastman Museum, formerly called George Eastman House. And the Cromer collection immediately established the museum as one of the most important centers for the study of photography. And these holdings are still to this day the most important holdings of early French photography and photo technology outside of France. Oops, I skipped something here. Okay. Fast forward to 2016, when the funding was granted to George Eastman Museum by the Institute of Museum and Library Services, which is an organization that advances, supports, and empowers America's museums, libraries, and related organizations through grants, research, and policy development. So the grant had the stated purpose of achieving physical and intellectual control over the collection while providing free online access for both scholarly research and recreational inquiry. Now, meet Team Cromer. So Heather Shannon, the curator in charge of the project, is an associate curator in the Department of Photography at the museum. Then myself, the cataloguer, and Alan Phoenix was the photographer who digitized all the Cromer material as we went through it. This was truly an interdepartmental project involving staff from every part of the museum, really. from the curators and collection managers to conservators and registrars. For example, the technology curator located Cromer material for me. In addition, the librarian, Ken Fox, was involved in documenting Cromer's books, his book collection and papers and other archival materials. And the museum photographer, Liz Chang, photographed part of the technology collection, but she also took pictures of me. So that's me at work. My portion of the project began in February 2017. And I got to examine everything that appears to have passed through Cromer's hands. I measured, I identified, described, and transcribed, all of which in accordance with the museum cataloging manual and standards. So how this worked was that each day, a cart full of material was brought out to me to catalog. And for the first year or so, I worked in the department of photographs on daguerreotypes and other cased objects, then salted albumin and gelatin prints, then the photo illustrated books and photo albums. And in the spring of the second year, I worked in the moving image department where the cinema materials, so film posters and early cinema objects. And then I went to the technology collection for 4 months in the summer. And then in the fall, I worked on the Cromer papers and collected materials held in the library. So to do all this work of gathering, organizing, and entering all the information from each object in the collection management software, I used a basic toolkit, which consisted of a ruler and measuring tape, mylar sheets to cover the objects I was inspecting, as in the photograph there, loupe and magnifier to decipher hard-to-read embossings and faint handwriting. I used my phone quite a bit to take reference images and enlarge details. I used book cradle, flashlight. So when I needed to see some embossing, I needed a raking light, so flashlight came in handy. And I wore gloves almost all of the time, mostly the nitrile gloves, the blue ones, because they offer a better dexterity and feel for the objects. But my main recording tool was the laptop computer, which I entered the data directly into the collection management software. And for the nerds out there, the software that we use is called TMS, which stands for the Museum System. And I use that every day. And it is actually used in many other major American cultural institutions, such as the Met, for instance. And it was implemented at George Eastman Museum in the mid-2000s. And the prior database records were migrated into TMS. So part of my work included moving old database information into the correct fields. Because when you migrate information from one software to another, sometimes it doesn't end up quite in the right place. And sometimes some things get lost. So part of my work included moving the database into the right places and formatting them to the current standards. And as you can imagine, museum practices have changed considerably in the last 50 years. So sometimes I was asked why wasn't this done before, but really the answer is related to inventories and databases, because when the Cromer material was loaned to the museum in 1949, it was inventoried on index cards. It wasn't until 1972 that the title to the collection was officially transferred to the museum. So some of the information associated with each object had never really been recorded in any inventory, or when it wasn't complete. And sometimes I would open a record in the TMS database and all the fields were blank, except for a number and maybe a photograph or an old description, and everything else had to be updated. So I basically reassembled the collection in a virtual sense in the database using the old records as well as the list and index card mentioned in the letter to Walter Clark, and the 1925 exhibition list from the French Photography Society, and also Cromer's own index cards, which he had been working on, but there's not very many of those. And when those sources were exhausted or missing, then I would consult the library within the museum, the reference library, and also online collections and materials from international sources, thanks to the magic of Google and the World Wide Web. So here are a few samples of Cromer's index cards in his little, what I call, chicken scratches. I did get used to reading his handwriting, but initially, it's very tiny and sometimes very difficult to decipher. So there were only 44 index cards, such as these, and I produced transcriptions, and then I matched them to the objects and added them to the corresponding TMS record. And I also provided transcriptions to the library to be kept with the originals. There is an inventory of the cases shipped from Paris, but they're not detailed enough to be useful. So, and then of course, all of those documents are in French. So one of the biggest challenges was to decipher and transcribe Mr. Cromer's notes, which he made on a lot of the material, directly on the material or on the back of the prints or the back of framed items. And all of it was mostly in pencil and in that choppy handwriting of his. So that had been an issue for curators and collection managers and researchers for decades. So in this image, you can see some of that writing is visible on the door of the cinématographe that he acquired from Louis Lumière, as I mentioned earlier. And the note says, one of the first machines according to Mr. Louis Lumière. This is an example from an album in the Department of Photographs, so just to give you an idea of the amount of notes that I often had to decipher. And once I did that, I entered the text in the database so that it could be read by future researchers. However, in the interest of time, I did not translate the notes. I just transcribed them in French. And now they can be copied and pasted into Google Translate to get a rough translation. So I often refer to what I did as detective work. And for example, we had no information on this CDV. So the monogram on the back looked familiar to me. So I searched through some of the reference images I had taken with my phone, and I was able to identify the monogram belonging to photographer Alphonse Davan. So I was then able to add the photographer's name, the location, and the year that this photo was taken to the record based on what is known about Davan and the years that his studio was in operation. So I had to do this kind of research for a lot of the material that was not dated or lacked other basic information such as maker or subject. During the summer of 2018, I cataloged the material in the technology collection. So this display case used to be in the public gallery when you came into the museum. It contained a majority of objects from Cromer's collection. It's, well, they're early so-called detective or spy cameras, such as the cane with the camera and in the handle, and the cameras that are disguised to look like handguns and books. And these are some of the other unusual and interesting items within the technology collection that were collected by Cromer, and I had the pleasure to catalog. And some of these are very rare items, possibly, you know, one of a kind, really. In the technology collection, initially there were only around 200 objects that were identified as coming from the Cromer collection. But during the 4 months that I worked there, I helped to identify 300 additional Cromer objects with the help of Mrs. Cromer's list and the old index cards, and also marks that Cromer left on the object themselves. So in the end, I cataloged over 500 technology objects collected by Cromer, some of the earliest cameras and portable darkrooms in existence today, but also an array of lenses, shutters, viewers, tripods, flash lamps, and other accessories, which you can see some examples here. So Cromer's handwriting alone allowed us to recognize many objects that were not previously identified as being from his collection. And in addition, there were a lot of other telltale signs of Cromer's involvement, such as the little stamps and the little circular sticker that he used on some things, and the labels with descriptions. And most of these that you see here were put there by Cromer, but a few were added by the Kodak company when they acquired the collection. And then a few other things were added by the museum when it was transferred to the museum. These ones are items that were in the technology collection, and they also had the same type of things, the excuse me, the Cromer sticker and the even numbers handwritten directly on the items. In a couple of cases, I even found Cromer's sticker inside the lenses and on cameras actually stamped into the wood. And this is where the flashlight became an essential tool to appear inside the lenses and with the raking light to see the indentations in the wood. The curator of the technology collection also located old index cards, which concealed original notes in Cromer's handwriting about the cameras and lenses. So these notes Cromer had placed in the cameras, and when they made these index cards, they took the notes out and tucked them in behind the cards, and we found them still there in, you know, pristine. So I was able to transcribe all the new information and add it to the records, and then the notes have now been digitized and added to the database. So during my 2-year term, I had the privilege of cataloging a really wide variety of materials of every type, shape, and size. And the digitization was an integral part of the project, as the images produced accompany every catalog record. So the digitization follows specific guidelines such as calibration standards and established handling practices. And some of the items were a challenge for the photographer. At top here, you see the very wide mounted panorama of Istanbul is actually 15 feet wide. So it had to be photographed in sections prior to being digitally assembled, while a very small album of Paris landmarks required custom cradle to hold it in place during the photo shoot. Through my 2 years, I feel as though I was introduced to royalty. I got to travel in time to Paris, and I even got to the temple. I got to visit the Temple of Daguerre in Egypt when it was still in Egypt before it moved to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Cromer had accumulated over 500 daguerreotypes, and I had the chance to see them all, the famous ones and not so famous ones. And this is a full plate daguerreotype of an unidentified subject by an unidentified photographer, but it was one of my favorites. It's just beautiful. Now, before anybody asks, I also investigated an unidentified daguerreotype photographer known only as Cromer's Amateur, and I was able to add information to a few of the images attributed to Cromer's Amateur, but unfortunately, my research was inconclusive and Cromer's Amateur remains a mystery. And I have to tell you about some of the highlights of this project for me. The day that I had Mr. Daguerre's portrait on my desk was definitely one of the favorite days of the entire 2 years there. There's only 7 portraits of Daguerre known to exist, and this is one of the most iconic ones in my opinion. It's absolutely priceless, and most researchers and photography scholars are familiar with it. It was taken by Sabatier-Vlot, but how many get to physically examine it closely and then turn it over to examine what's on the back of the frame and what was written there since it was made in 1844. The photographer Sabatier-Vlot wrote that this is a portrait of his friend, Daguerre, and then Sabatier-Vlot's granddaughter writes that this is indeed her grandfather's handwriting, so she confirms that it was his. And then Cromer, of course, had to write a bunch of stuff, so he wrote that he acquired it from Sabatier-Vlot's granddaughter and that he has her mother's portrait in his collection, and you know, he documents how he acquired the object and where it came from. So he was very meticulous collector. This also is another very important object in the Cromer collection. It is a daguerreotype portrait that was taken by Daguerre, and it's a half-plate portrait of an unidentified painter, and it's signed on the plate by Daguerre himself. In the technology collection, the highlight was, of course, for me, the Giroux camera and its accessories. This is a camera that was commissioned by Daguerre, and it's the first commercially produced photographic cameras ever made. And the identification medallion bears Daguerre's signature. And there's only about a dozen of these cameras left in the world. When I examined it, I found Cromer's number 18 written in various places. So Cromer had given this camera and the kit, the accessory kit, number 18. So I found number 18 inside the lens, which you can see there in the red circle at top left, and also Cromer's stamp name on both box parts on the same side as the famous medallion. But the best part for me was discovering 2 lines of Cromer's handwriting in pencil on the edge of the focusing screen mirror. And I could not find any prior reference to this. And the curator of the technology collection, who's been there for 30 years, he had never noticed this. I just happened to see it with my flashlight. I was trying to find numbers and things, And I just happened to see a little tiny bit of the graphite lead pencil writing is slightly shiny, and it just caught my eye. Now, this note doesn't deliver any earth-shattering information, but it's a discovery nonetheless, and it was a bit of a thrill for me. It appears to be saying that the mirror was replaced or recut at some point, and this is consistent with Cromer's index card, which suggests that the mirror was not there when Cromer wrote the index card. He says that the mirror was not there, so he probably had it put there and fixed. Anyways, I could go on and on, but my time is almost up, and basically the project stated that the museum was going to catalog 4,000 objects and create 8,000 digital images, but in the end I cataloged more than 6,000 objects, and I understand that there's over 10,000 images created. As far as I know, the curator, Heather Shannon, the project leader, she's still working on a book and an exhibition on the collection, and it should be happening between July and December 2022, as I mentioned before. So if you would like to see some of this collection and for yourself, that would be the time to go to Rochester. And this is me with the famous Giroux camera. And if you want to contact me, if you have any questions, my email is there, and I'd be happy to answer some questions. And thank you very much for being here this evening.
Thank you, Edith. That was brilliant. I really, really enjoyed that presentation.
Thank you.
And I have to qualify as a photo cataloging librarian myself. I was geeking out. Amazing.
Yes.
Amazing collection.
Yes, it was.
Let's see, in the chat.
Should I stop sharing my screen now?
You can leave it up because your email's there. People might want to jot that down.
Okay.
And
I'll give you another little bit of
can
time.
change their, actually, at the end, we'll stop sharing the screen so that people can
So
do
we can see
gallery
everybody.
view, and
Yes.
we can see everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just stick in the question that I typed in there. I know this is comprehensive, this collection of the Eastman House, but do other museums have examples of Cromer's own work? Did you find in your research?
Well, the SFP, the Société Française de Photography, the Photo Historical Society in Paris, they have some Cromer items. They have some of his work and also some items that he donated to them from his collection. So, you know, historical photographs or technology items. And that's the main place, I think, that would have some of his work and some of his items. They're not an actual museum, but you can go there and make an appointment and visit.
Artie has a question, wants to know if there are any Niepce items in this collection.
There are. He actually went to Chalon-sur-Saône, and he was in contact with Niepce descendants, and he obtained a few things, but they're not really well documented. So so some of it, I don't know if it would be in. He actually helped to do an exhibition in 1933, which was the 100th anniversary of Niepce's death. So the town of Chalon-sur-Saône put up like a little display of photography history, and some of Cromer's things were there. And there is a camera that supposedly belonged to Niepce's, I think it was his nephew, or there was another Niepce that was involved in photography history, I guess. And there's a camera there that belonged to him that Cromer acquired, and it's in Rochester now. But they're not very, see, Cromer only made those 44 little index cards before he died. So some of the items he was going to identify, but he didn't get the chance. So we are missing some information about some of the material. So we just had to kind of do the, you know, you couldn't make assumptions. You can't just say, oh yeah, well, that's probably it. So we could only write down in the cataloging records what we knew for sure. So some of the items might be from Niepce, but we don't know for sure anymore because some of the information just kind of is not clear enough. I don't know if that answers your question, but
Let's see. People are exhibiting a lot of interest in coming to the exhibit 2022. And
yes,
the book.
I'll be there.
Yes. Let's see.
It'd be nice to see these things again.
And people are applauding your detective work. So,
Oh, thank you. It was
Joseph,
fun. That part was fun. So, you know.
my favorite part also.
Yes.
Joseph Marlin wants to ask, what is the current estimated value of the Cromer collection?
Well, it's priceless. I'm not aware of any, you know, dollar amount. I have no idea. The Giro camera came for auction a few years back, and it went for almost $1 million. That's just that one camera. So, you know, actually, Mrs. Cromer, Madame Cromer, wanted 700,000 francs, which is, and Kodak, well, the French government offered her 300, so she turned that down, and Kodak ended up getting it for 500,000 francs, which was just a little over half of her asking price. And in 1939 dollars, that was roughly $13,000. That's what Kodak paid for. Now they had to pay for shipping and stuff, but they probably just shipped it with, because they had the Kodak office there, so the Kodak office took care of that.
Did Cromer collect from auctions himself? Did he have auction catalogs that trace the history of some of the objects?
No, I don't recall coming across auction catalogs, no. But he did have contacts with dealers, and he would just track down stuff. One of the albums that I cataloged had been found, you know, on the Seine, on the Seine, you know, there's all these little booksellers around in Paris. Well, he had, it says right in the album, he found it on the quays of the Seine. So just, you know, he had people keeping an eye on things for him, and they would find stuff and bring it to him.
And there's so many different parts of this collection besides his own papers and the technology and the photographs, the index cards and the sort of metadata that you're transcribing that a researcher wouldn't be able to see just by looking at the front of a photograph online. It's all the extra information
Yes.
that you get to add to these images that is so valuable.
And I did add a lot of it to the records, but when you go online on the George Eastman Museum website, you don't really see everything that I put there. But if you're a researcher and you want to see the full records, then you would have to contact a museum and get all the information that way.
Steve has a question, wants to know if you tested any of the technology items like the shutters on the cameras.
No, no, that was not part of my job, and I did as little handling as possible. I did only enough handling to measure and to look at it to see if there were any stickers or stamps or anything like that, but that's it. Yeah. Some of those objects are in more or less good shape. Like the lenses are very sturdy. They're made of brass. They're like probably like new, but some of the wooden cameras and some of the things, yes, I handled as little as possible because I didn't want to be responsible for any damage or anything like that. So no.
Someone who is writing from Europe, where it is much later, wants to know about, is there more information about Cromer's own work that maybe isn't in this research?
Well, there is somebody who did, I believe, a master's thesis on Cromer, but it was a French woman and she did it from a university in France. So that it's kind of like a biography of Cromer, which I never had the time to read, but that's a little bit of work on Cromer that's out there. And like I said, the Société Française de Photographie, they have some of his examples of his work. They might have some people that did some work on him because he was a very active member and he was their librarian for many years. And so I'm sure that they probably have some material about him and about his material.
Oh, and as we were preparing, we were rehearsing this presentation, could you explain to people why his name is pronounced Cromer? Is it just anglicized because it was originally pronounced how?
I think it's, if you were in France, they would call him Gabriel Cromer, but here, everybody, in Rochester, I always heard him referred as Mr. Cromer, Gabriel Cromer, the Cromer Project. So that's what I call him too. If about the previous question, I think the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, the BNF, which is the National Library of France, I believe they have some Cromer material as well, like from his collection that he donated to them.
And I imagine when the catalog comes out, there may be more in the bibliography at the end.
Yes.
If people are trying to track down.
At some point, there was talk of the BNF collaborating with George Eastman Museum for the exhibition, but then there were delays and financial issues, and now with COVID and everything, I'm not sure where that stood or where that stands now. I have no idea.
Ben mentions that in Boston it's pronounced chroma. So,
Oh, well, yes.
uh,
With the Boston accent, okay, yeah.
we're getting, Ben, how are we doing for time?
It's almost 10 o'clock here.
Yeah.
We
I
had
think
one person raised their hand. We might be able to take just a few brief questions.
I'm
if
going
people
to
would
stop
like-
sharing now
Okay, thanks.
so we can see everybody.
Edith, do you have maybe like 5-10 minutes to answer a few more questions?
Sure.
I know it's late.
Gallery view. Yeah, no, go ahead.
Okay. Jim raised his hand. Jim, are you there? Did you have a question? Jim McDonough?
Oh,
looks like he's working on the
muted.
mute button.
Yeah, unmute yourself, Jim.
There
Okay,
you go.
sorry.
You're unmuted.
Bonjour,
Bonsoir.
Madame, from Northern New Hampshire. Merci for a nice talk. I enjoyed it. I had no idea what this was all about, and I'm glad I stuck around. It was worthwhile. I look forward to seeing the presentation in Rochester and the showing in Rochester. And PHSNE has gone a few times on trips to Rochester, and I think this might be a great field trip for after this damn pandemic is done.
Yes.
But the real reason why I'm talking here, it looks like Neil Gordon, Marty Jones, and I have been nominated to nominate people to be on the board of directors for PHSNE. PHSNE, of course, is a volunteer organization. And Ben, thank you for stepping up and agreeing to become a member of the board. As I look through the participants here, a lot of you guys have served your time in the bucket. I know this. A lot of us have over the years. And you know, if you have some time, think about maybe getting back on the board again. Talk to Neil Gordon, Marty Jones, or me, or anybody on the board. We'd love to have you to serve again. And again, merci, madame.
My
Thanks,
pleasure.
Jim. Anyone else have a brief question?
I do.
Okay, Vladimir.
Hello, Edith. This is Vladimir. And question regarding one of your slides. With the corner of my eye, it was very, very quick exchange. But I noticed that you showed Chevalier camera. Is it
Yes.
that famous Chevalier who brought Niepce together with Daguerre?
I believe so, yes. It's Charles Chevalier?
Yeah.
Yes.
Is it
And
him?
he was, he made cameras, and he was involved with lenses as well, I believe.
Right, he was an optician.
Yes, yes. That's the same, very same person, yes.
Yeah. Actually, it is area of my interest too, those years. And you mentioned some other person who is related to Niepce.
Yes,
Was the name, the first name Isidore?
yes.
That's his son.
Isidore. Yes.
That's his son.
So I'm pretty sure there's a camera there that is believed to have belonged to him.
Right. That's his son, and
He's the one who basically dealt with Daguerre after Niepce passed away, right?
yes, and he's the one who published a lot of letters saying that Daguerre did not do very nice, did not deal very nice with Isidore.
Oh,
Yeah,
I wouldn't know anything about that.
Isidore wrote several letters on that, and he
Yeah.
said that after Nicéphore Niepce's death, Daguerre changed the name of the company so that Niepce's name was pushed out of it, almost
Mm.
out of it.
Right.
And that's how Daguerre got all the positive things and information, and all the he became that's how he became a father of photography, which
Right.
he probably isn't.
Thanks, Glenn. Anyone else have a quick question? We'll do one more.
You know, Dana, this is Ben. I wanted to chime in too. I think now is probably like the most appropriate time for everyone to come off mute and give give Edith a huge, well-deserved round of applause, because I could just see all the smiling faces. So everyone, please come off mute and let her hear it. Thank you so much, Edith.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
I know it's late there, so I want to thank you for staying, you know, into the evening to talk with us about this. It was a fantastic presentation. Really, we're so
You're very
thrilled to have
welcome.
you.
I enjoyed it. I'm glad. Well, I gave a similar presentation to the board of directors or the trustees at George Eastman Museum before I left. And I gave a similar presentation also at the Daguerrean Society Symposium in 2018 in New York City. And also I gave it to the Photo Historical Society in Rochester. So, you know, I did tweak it a little bit for you, but basically, yeah, I'm glad to spread the word. And now that the exhibition hopefully will take place next year, it's kind of a good time to remind everybody, you know, that that's coming, and maybe I'll see you all there.
That would be a fabulous field trip. And just before we close tonight, I wanted to just remind people that we are off for the summer. There will be no Zoom presentation in July and August, and we're going to return in September. I'm not sure about the status of resuming in-person meetings. I think that's under discussion. So keep your eye on the website and your email. And Edith, you're a member, an honorary member now.
Yes, I'll see you. I'll see you in
Join us
September.
in September. We will look for you. And,
Great.
thank you, everybody. And I invite you all to chat amongst yourselves. Ben, is that okay for a couple more minutes?
Actually,
I would just like to put a foot in my mouth on this. Dana, you deserve so much applause for running the programs this past year. This has transformed PHSNE. Thank you, Dana G.
Yes. Good job.
Thank you.
I'm going to say good night.
Good night, Edith.
We'll see you.
Bonsoir.
Bonsoir.
good night. Good night,
Good
Edith.
night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Merci.
Dana, one thing I did want to note is in the chat, I posted a link to a new PHSNE publication. It's the T.E. Mars and Sons, cataloging the
Yes, I'm
Isabella
sorry. I did not
Stewart
announce
gardeners.
that.
And also there's a link to it, and it's by our very own Ron. And I don't know if Ron is still on the call, but maybe you could even, if he'd be willing to talk about it for just a minute, it might be like kind of a good time for that.
Ron, are you there?
If Ron's not available to talk, does anyone else know more about it than I do? Because I know a very small amount about it, but I did put the link in the chat.
As the editor of the journal, I can tell you that the standalone version that Ron extended is just an amazing and in-depth story about not just Isabella Stewart Gardner's relationship with Mar, father and son, but there's so much. It's a real upstairs, downstairs American story about immigrants who came to this country from Nova Scotia, father and son, and became really stars in landscape and architectural photography. The photographs are amazing, and I can't say enough about how hard Ron has worked to research everything there is to know about the Marr, father and son photographic team. And once the son, Arthur, sort of closed the studio in the early 1940s, they pretty much disappeared. But for about 30 years, the Marrs were among the most respected photographers, not just in Boston and New England, but throughout the country for the kind of work that they did. And they had clients who are the equivalent of the Jeff Bezoses and the all of the great Gilded Age multimillionaires, including a guy named Thomas Lawson, whose estate in Scituate is still just an amazing artifact, and with many, many, many photographs at the Scituate Library where some of the material came from. It's a really remarkable accomplishment over many, many years of research. I'll just leave it there.
And people can order it directly from the MagCloud link that is in the chat?
That's correct, and also it's in the bottom of the 2 emails that were sent announcing this particular Zoom meeting as well.
Will it be linked on the PHSNE website?
Yes, there are.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Reich. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you.
Yes.
And actually, just to let everyone know, in the amount of time that it took to do this, I've just placed my order for a book. So I clicked through. They actually let you pay with PayPal too, if you want to pay with PayPal. And I've already ordered it. It's on the way. So Ron, thank you for doing that. And Reich, that was such a great description of it. Thank you so much for stepping in on that.
Yes, we appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you, Ben, and thank you, Joel. And it's been a great presentation. I hope you guys all enjoy your summer. If anyone, we do have presentations booked through November of 2021. And you'll read more about those in the coming issues of Snapshots. And then I don't know what we're doing in December, if we will have our live auction again, or if we're going to attempt on Zoom again. Not an auction, but a holiday party rather. Traditionally in December, we have a get together and a fabulous auction, a member auction, and sort of a holiday celebration. And this past December, we had just a holiday party on Zoom.
So it was pretty raucous. I believe
that. Oh my God. So, and if anyone has suggestions for presentations or presenters, the email is programs, program plural, programs @phsne.org. You can always send an email with a suggestion. So that's pretty much it for me, Ben.
I agree too. I think it's been great, and I think having an opportunity to go back in person will be nice. I know me personally, I've had a chance finally to see my parents and stuff like that recently, and it's been a long year, but having this PHSNE thing going on month to month has been a real bright spot for me. And I know everyone here, we've had so many people who have been at every single presentation or just about. So for all the regulars, thank you so much for supporting this and for making it what it's become. So thank you so much. And Dana, you've done a great job, and Joel leading the charge on this. So it's been a pleasure for me to be involved. Thank you so much.
I think we all owe Ben a round of applause personally.
Thanks, Dana. Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Dana. Thanks for everything.
Ben.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks a lot.
All right.
All right, everyone.
All right.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.